She wanted to divorce her cheating husband, but the other woman's husband showed up, handed her $100 million and said, "Don't divorce him yet. Wait 3 more months. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories, your own family channel. May the Almighty pour His strongest blessings upon every woman here, granting you health that renews, strength that never bends, and a heart so loving it becomes a shelter for generations. You are the quiet power behind families, the patience in hard days, the light that never stops giving even when tired. May your sacrifices be rewarded, your tears turned into peace, and your lives wrapped in honor and deep respect. I pray that your homes are protected, your bodies stay strong, and your souls remain calm no matter what life brings. May success walk toward you gently, may love surround you daily, and may your worth never be questioned, because you are precious beyond words. If your heart is true, like the video. If your love is real, write, "I am with Mr. Peter." Sophie Devine had built her interior design studio from nothing, so discovering her husband's betrayal didn't break her. It trapped her in a cage she'd helped construct with her own sacrifices. The text message glowed on Joe Clark's phone at 2 in the morning, carelessly abandoned on the kitchen counter. Sophie had come downstairs for water when the screen lit up with words that would destroy everything she thought she knew. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. The Ice Queen is working late again, so we have the whole afternoon. God, I don't know how you stand living with someone so cold and boring. At least she's useful for those connections, right? Love you more than she ever could." Signed with K and a heart emoji. Sophie read it once, twice, 3 times. Her hands shook so violently she had to set the phone down, automatically ensuring the angle matched perfectly, even as rage mixed with terror flooded her veins. Because standing in her expensive kitchen wearing the silk robe Joe had given her for Christmas, Sophie realized she was financially trapped. Joe controlled their joint account where both incomes were deposited. Joe's name was primary on the house deed because he'd convinced her it simplified the mortgage. Joe had methodically positioned himself as the breadwinner over 8 years, while Sophie's studio barely broke even, all profits flowing into materials or their shared life he controlled completely. She'd built him from nothing. Taken a struggling agent making $40,000 yearly and transformed him into someone earning $500,000 by introducing him to every major client. Taught him how to dress for wealthy buyers, navigate developer cocktail parties, speak luxury real estate's language. Joe had promised they'd build an empire together. Sophie had spent 8 years doing exactly that, making him successful while making herself small. Now she understood the cost. In creating Joe's success, she'd made herself dependent in ways she hadn't noticed until they revealed themselves as chains. Sophie walked to her office on trembling legs and opened her personal account. $4,000. That was everything. Joe made $500,000. Their mortgage was $2,200 monthly. Their lifestyle cost another $4,000 beyond that. If she confronted Joe now, demanded he leave, he'd take half in divorce, including the house her parents helped buy, the joint savings, her ability to survive. Without proof, without preparation, Sophie would walk away with almost nothing while Joe kept everything she'd built for him. She spent an hour cataloging the betrayal. Joe's cloud account revealed hotels going back 8 months, Riverside Hotel, room 214, 17 times, always Tuesday and Thursday afternoons when Sophie worked. Restaurants where she'd designed the private rooms, receipts for jewelry she'd never received, flowers she'd never smelled, champagne she'd never tasted, photos of Joe with a stunning blonde who smiled at him like he'd hung the moon. Katie Mack, married to Campbell Kellaway, the tech billionaire whose data security company made him one of the state's wealthiest men. Text messages filled Joe's phone, hundreds of them, Joe calling Sophie his meal ticket and professional stepping stone. Katie calling Campbell her walking bank account, both mocking their spouses, planning their future once they'd extracted maximum value from current marriages. Sophie wanted to scream. Wanted to confront Joe with evidence and watch him crumble, but she couldn't. If she did, Joe would leave, taking half of everything, including her studio's survival, her parents' investment, 8 years she'd devoted to building him. She was researching lawyers she couldn't afford when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Mrs. Clark? Male voice, exhausted. My name is Campbell Kellaway. Our spouses know each other well. I'm outside your door. We need to talk about what they've been doing and what we're doing about it. Sophie checked the security camera, heart hammering. A man stood under her porch light, tall, wearing jeans and a jacket instead of expensive suits. Haggard face, exhausted beyond measure. He held only a phone. His car was a rental, nothing fancy. He looked broken, desperately holding pieces together to survive. Sophie should have called police, should have woken Joe. Instead, she walked downstairs and opened the door. Campbell Kellaway looked nothing like Forbes' photos. Those showed confident CEO in designer suits. This man wore rumpled jeans, had shadows under his eyes speaking of sleepless weeks, lines around his mouth suggesting clenched jaw stress. He held an old iPhone with cracked screen. His rental was basic, cheapest airport tier. May I come in? I'm not here to cause problems. We're drowning in the same nightmare and working together we might survive. Separately we don't stand a chance. Sophie stepped aside wordlessly. Campbell entered and sat facing the door. Always the exit. A man who'd learned situations turned dangerous fast. I know about the affair. I've known 2 months. Katie has me legally trapped in ways I didn't anticipate. Her father was a financial criminal who went to prison for fraud. She learned how to trap someone with their own money, use prenuptial agreements and trusts to ensure if marriage ends, she walks away wealthy while I'm destroyed. He showed surveillance photos taken with a cheap camera. Katie and Joe at hotels, restaurants, Katie's mother's house. I'm not a billionaire right now. Not in any way that matters. My wife trapped me. My assets are in trusts taking months to access. My stock is restricted. My liquid cash is monitored by financial managers. Katie insisted we hire who report every transaction over $5,000 directly to her. I can't move money, can't access wealth, can't hire investigators without her team noticing. Sophie stared. You're broke. Campbell Kellaway is trapped like me. I'm functionally broke. I have maybe 20,000 accessible before Katie's surveillance team notices. Everything else is locked behind structures supposed to protect wealth from hostile takeovers, but actually just protect it from me. Katie knew exactly what she was doing. Her father taught her how to identify wealthy marks, position herself perfectly, use their success against them. Recognition hit Sophie hard. I have $4,000. Joe's name is primary on our house. My studio barely breaks even because I've been building his career instead of mine. I'm as trapped, maybe more, because you have 20,000. Campbell leaned forward, calculation replacing exhaustion. Then we help each other, not with money, neither has that luxury, but with intelligence, strategy. 2 people smarter than their cheating spouses, documenting everything, exposing everything, walking away without being destroyed. I have basic surveillance equipment bought with cash before monitoring started. You have access to Joe's routine, cloud storage, professional life. Together, we build a case that destroys them. Separately, we don't stand a chance. Then what? I can't afford lawyers against Katie's team. You can't access money fast enough. We get creative about leverage, make them so desperate to divorce us they walk away voluntarily, quickly, quietly. Document their affair so thoroughly that staying married becomes more dangerous than leaving. Expose them so they choose between reputations and relationship. Give them choice. Sign fair divorce agreements or watch us burn everything they built on our backs. Sophie looked at this stranger offering not rescue but partnership. What do you need from me? Campbell exhaled like he'd been holding breath. Help document Joe's movements, access to his schedule, cloud accounts, anything you can safely access. Information about his professional life, clients, network, and patience. This takes months, pretending everything's fine while gathering evidence. Months smiling while documenting betrayal. Can you do that? Call me Sophie, and I need something too. Name it. I need to know this is real. That you're not some trap Katie and Joe set so Joe can divorce me claiming I've lost my mind and take everything. Campbell handed her his wallet without hesitation. License, business cards, credit cards, photo with his executive team. Take pictures of everything, run background checks, call my office tomorrow. Google me, research me, investigate thoroughly. I'll give you personal cell, company email, assistant's contact, everything to confirm I'm real. And Sophie, I'm doing the same verification with you. We need to trust each other completely. Trust without verification isn't trust. It's just hope wearing disguise. They spent 2 hours exchanging information like spies in enemy territory. Sophie photographed Campbell's identification, wrote contact information, took notes on Katie and the affair and legal traps. Campbell did the same with Sophie's information. He showed her surveillance documentation, cheap spiral notebook from a dollar store filled with handwritten notes, dates, times, locations, 2 months of desperate surveillance using a camera bought with cash. We can't hire lawyers yet, can't make financial moves alerting them. We do this quietly, carefully. 3 months, Sophie. Give me 3 months to document everything. Position my company assets so Katie can't touch them. Build a case so strong she'll sign divorce papers to make it go away. Can you do 3 months? Sophie thought about 8 years building Joe while hers stayed small, about $4,000 and terror, about having no choice but playing devoted wife while gathering weapons. I can do 3 months, but Campbell, we document everything. We stay legal. We don't become what they are. Campbell extended his hand. Deal. 3 months. We survive together and walk away free. Sophie shook it, his grip warm despite exhaustion. Why show up at my door? You could fight alone. Campbell smiled, tired, sad, real. Because I've been doing this alone 2 months and it's killing me. Pretending at home destroys me. I looked at your design work and saw someone understanding that beautiful things require patience. And Sophie, we deserve better. Maybe helping each other is how we survive. He left before Sophie could respond. She stood listening to Joe's shower, her husband preparing to lie. But now Sophie had a weapon, not money, not power, just an ally. 3 months to document and prepare to fight back. Sophie climbed stairs, slipped into bed, waited. When Joe kissed her forehead and murmured, "Love you, babe," Sophie smiled and whispered it back. But inside, she was counting. Day 1, 89 to go. She fell asleep, thinking not about revenge, but survival. About making it through 3 months without breaking. About walking away alive and whole and free. The revenge would come later. First, Sophie just needed mourning. Chapter 2. The Warriors' Alliance. Desperation doesn't look like Hollywood portrays. It looks like 2 exhausted people meeting at midnight because neither can risk being seen together in daylight hours. Sophie met Campbell 4 days later at a diner 40 minutes outside the city where neither knew anyone, and security cameras were too old to matter. She'd spent those days verifying everything, calling his office, running background checks she couldn't afford but charged a credit card anyway, confirming Campbell Kellaway was exactly who he claimed. A man trapped by lawyers smarter than anticipated, desperate enough to appear at a stranger's door at midnight. Campbell arrived looking worse than 4 nights prior, same jacket, carrying backpack instead of expensive briefcase. He ordered coffee with shaking hands. Katie's lawyers are monitoring accounts. I bought a burner phone with cash yesterday, and she got fraud alert somehow. They're tracking everything, every dollar, every transaction. I have maybe 15,000 left before triggering alarms. Sophie's stomach clenched. She'd counted on Campbell having resources. I have 3,800 after running those checks. My 2 projects are clients Joe introduced me to. If this goes public, they might pull business. They sat in silence, realizing how thoroughly trapped they were. This was a mistake, Sophie said finally. We have no money, no lawyers, no resources. We're losing everything. No. Steel ran through Campbell's voice. Money isn't the only power. Katie and Joe have money, but they don't have what we possess. Which is? Intelligence, patience, surprise. They think they've won. They think we're too weak to fight. That's their weakness. Arrogance is our advantage. Sophie wanted belief, but exhaustion made seeing past next mortgage payment impossible. How does arrogance help when I literally cannot afford leaving my house? Campbell pulled cheap spiral notebook from his backpack. Here's what we have. Access to their private information. You can access Joe's email, calendar, cloud storage. I can track Katie using family phone plan she doesn't know I monitor. We document everything without spending $1 on professional surveillance. He showed pages of handwritten notes, dates, times, locations documented in careful script. 2-month surveillance I've done myself. Every time Katie met Joe, I followed with cheap camera. Every deleted text I recovered using free software. It's enough to start building leverage. Sophie looked at desperate documentation, felt something shift. Not hope exactly, but determination. Show me how you're doing this. They spent 3 hours learning about surveillance on a budget. Free phone tracking apps meant for parental monitoring, old smartphones as security cameras, recovering deleted messages using cloud backups, documenting everything in ways holding up later even without lawyers. Key is, we're not breaking laws. These are our spouses. We have legal access to shared accounts, devices, spaces. Everything we're doing is technically legal, just thorough. When we have enough evidence? Campbell's expression turned calculating. We make them not want fighting. Gather so much evidence that staying married becomes more expensive than divorcing. Make them desperate getting away before we expose them publicly. You're discussing blackmail. Mutually assured destruction. We tell them, sign fair divorce agreement, or we make everything very public. Katie doesn't want her social circle knowing. Joe doesn't want clients knowing he built career on your work. We give choice, fair settlement or public humiliation. Sophie's pulse quickened. Not perfect, but something. Why 3 months specifically? Because I need restructuring company assets in ways Katie's lawyers can't touch, can't move money, but I can shift stock options. By day 90, even if she fights, she can't destroy me completely. And you need securing your own clients, building studio as truly independent, creating financial foundation. With what money? With clients I'm sending you. Campbell showed burner phone contact list. People I know needing design work but aren't connected to Katie. Can't give money directly, but I can recommend you for projects. You do work, get paid, build independently. By day 90, you'll have enough that leaving becomes possible. Sophie stared at names. Tech CEOs, startup founders, people never hearing of Joe Clark. You'd do that? We're partners. Your success is my success. Besides, I looked at your portfolio. You're brilliant. You deserve clients appreciating your work instead of Joe's scraps. For the first time since discovering the affair, Sophie felt tears, not sadness, but unexpected kindness. Okay, 3 months. We document everything. You send clients, I build business, we gather leverage. Day 90, we make them an offer, fair divorce or public destruction. One more thing. Next 3 months will be hell. Going home pretending we don't know, watching them lie, playing devoted spouse while documenting betrayal. It's breaking us if we're not careful. What are you suggesting? We meet weekly, not just for strategy, but to survive, to have one person understanding, to be each other's lifeline when performance becomes too much. Sophie thought about going home tonight, smiling, cooking dinner, acting like her heart wasn't shattered. Doing that alone felt impossible. Once weekly. But Campbell, we stay focused. This can't become about anything except survival and strategy. Agreed. About getting free, nothing more. But as they planned, Sophie wondered if either believed that. Shared trauma created bonds whether wanted or not. They stayed until 4, planning every detail. Campbell would send client referrals by week's end. Sophie would give Campbell access to Joe's cloud account. They'd meet every Wednesday at midnight at different locations. As dawn broke, Campbell stood leaving. One more thing, don't lose yourself in this. Don't let rage and fear turn you into someone you're not. Promise me on day 91, you'll still be you. I don't know who I am anymore. I'm so angry I can barely breathe. So scared I wake panicking. So tired pretending I don't remember real emotions. Campbell squeezed her hand once. Then we figure out who we are together. We survive this and come out better than people who betrayed us. Deal? Deal. He left before full daylight. Sophie sat finishing cold coffee. Her phone buzzed, Joe asking where she was. Sophie typed smoothly. Couldn't sleep, went for drive. Home soon. Love you. She drove home as sun rose. Joe was making breakfast like he hadn't spent yesterday with another man's wife. He kissed her cheek, and Sophie performed concern so perfectly even she believed it. But underneath performance, Sophie felt something new. Not hope, just determination, just quiet knowledge that she wasn't alone. Day 5. 85 days remaining. And Sophie Devine was learning that survival sometimes meant becoming someone never imagined, someone who could smile and lie and document while her world crumbled. She went upstairs showering, leaving Joe with his coffee and lies, thinking about Campbell's notebook, about his burner phone and free apps and desperate determination. They were losing, 2 people with no resources fighting 2 people having everything, but losing while fighting was better than surrendering. Water ran hot, washing away exhaustion, but not permanent fear. 3 months felt like eternity and nowhere near long enough. Sophie looked in mirror. The woman staring back looked tired and scared and angry and determined. She looked like someone betrayed and trapped who was realizing that trapped animals fight hardest. Day 5. 85 days remaining. Sophie Devine was just getting started. Chapter 3. The breaking point. Playing devoted wife was destroying Sophie piece by piece, and by week 3, she was starting to crack under the weight of performing love while drowning in rage. Tuesday morning arrived with Sophie running on 3 hours sleep and pure adrenaline. Her bank account showed $2,800 after paying studio rent and buying groceries with hands that shook, counting every dollar. Campbell's first client referral, Marcus Reynolds from Tech Vista, had sent a $5,000 deposit, but it wouldn't clear for 3 business days. 3 days felt like eternity when counting every penny. Joe came downstairs wearing confidence of someone thinking he was getting away with something. Big presentation today, babe. Might be late. Sophie had seen his calendar. The presentation was real, scheduled for 2. What came after was Katie at Riverside Hotel at 6. Again. Always again. Good luck, darling. Sophie kissed him and felt nothing but exhaustion threatening to swallow her whole. 3 weeks of performing was breaking her faster than anticipated, faster than she'd prepared for, faster than she could patch together with determination alone. The moment Joe left, Sophie's hand started shaking so violently she dropped her coffee mug. It shattered against kitchen tile, ceramic exploding across the floor, and something inside Sophie shattered with it. She sank down among broken pieces and started crying, not elegant tears but ugly, gasping sobs that came from somewhere deep and broken and terrified beyond measure. Her phone rang. Campbell, as if somehow knowing she was falling apart. Sophie, you okay? You didn't text good morning like usual. I'm not okay. Sophie's voice cracked, fractured like the mug surrounding her. I can't do this anymore, Campbell. I can't smile at him. I can't pretend. I can't keep acting like everything is fine when I'm dying inside. I just broke down crying over spilled coffee, and I can't stop shaking, and I don't know how to survive 2 more months of this performance. Where are you now? Kitchen floor. Surrounded by broken coffee mug and my complete inability to function like a normal human being. I'm coming over. Don't argue. Joe's gone, you're alone, and you need someone understanding. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Campbell hung up before Sophie could protest. She stayed on floor, staring at broken ceramic, wondering when exactly she'd become someone falling apart over coffee mugs and 3 weeks of lies. Campbell arrived in 18 minutes, let himself through unlocked door Sophie had forgotten securing, and found her still sitting on kitchen floor. He didn't speak. He just sat down beside her among broken pieces and let her cry until no tears remained. I'm failing, Sophie finally whispered. I'm supposed to be strong and strategic, and I'm falling apart after 3 weeks. How am I supposed to survive 2 more months when I can barely survive today? By not doing it alone. Campbell's voice was gentle. Sophie, I had a breakdown 2 nights ago. Katie asked why I was being distant, and I almost told her everything. I almost destroyed our entire plan because I couldn't handle performing anymore. You're not failing. You're surviving something impossible. What stopped you? Thinking about you. Knowing you're going through same hell and counting on me to keep together. Knowing that if I break, you're alone in this. So I swallowed truth and lied to her face and hated myself for it. But I survived another day. We both did. Sophie looked at him. This stranger become her only ally, only lifeline, only person understanding what it felt like drowning in lies while performing love. I got the deposit from Marcus Reynolds, $5,000. It cleared yesterday and I stared at my account for an hour crying because I can afford groceries now. I'm 38 crying over being able to buy food, Campbell. This is what they've reduced us to. Then we reduce them to less. We survive this, and we make sure they understand exactly what they destroyed. Campbell stood, pulling Sophie up with him. But first, let's clean this mess. Broken things don't stay broken forever. Sometimes they get rebuilt into something stronger. They cleaned broken mug together in silence. Campbell made new coffee. They sat at Sophie's kitchen table, two exhausted people remembering why they were fighting so hard. I have to tell you something, Campbell said after long silence. Joe knows something is happening. Sophie's blood went cold. What? Not about us specifically, but he's getting suspicious. I overheard him on phone with Katie yesterday. I was following them documenting another hotel meeting, and he said something about you acting different. Said you seem distracted. Said he's worried you're having an affair because you're not as affectionate as usual. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't terrifying. He thinks I'm cheating? The guilty always project. But Sophie, if he starts really paying attention, if he starts checking your phone or accounts or movements, he'll see late-night meetings with me. He'll see surveillance. He'll figure out what we're doing. So what do? We move faster. Not 3 months, 6 weeks. We gather what we can in next 6 weeks and we execute. We can't risk him figuring this out before we're ready. Sophie felt panic rise. 6 weeks. Campbell, I'll barely have anything saved. One project payment won't be enough surviving. Then we make divorce settlement include enough for survival. We have documentation that Joe built entire career on your connections. We demand fair compensation for your contribution. We make him pay for what he stole. You really think we can do this in 6 weeks? Campbell pulled out his notebook, now filled with 3 weeks' careful documentation. We have 8 weeks evidence total. My 2 months before meeting you plus these 3 weeks. Another 6 weeks gives us 14 weeks documentation. That's enough proving systematic betrayal. That's enough negotiating from. Sophie stared at notebook, at this desperate man's careful notes, and made a decision. Okay, 6 weeks. But Campbell, I need you promising me something. What? If this goes wrong, if we lose everything, if Joe and Katie somehow win, promise me you won't regret trying. Promise me you won't wish you'd just accepted betrayal quietly, because I need knowing that fighting back is better than surrendering, even if we fail. Campbell reached across table and took both her hands. I promise. Win or lose, Sophie, we'll know we fought. We'll know we didn't let them destroy us without resistance. That has to count for something. They spent next 3 hours adjusting strategy for 6-week timeline. Sophie would focus on completing Marcus Reynolds' project and securing 2 more clients Campbell was sending. Campbell would continue surveillance while carefully repositioning company assets. They'd both document everything obsessively, building case impossible to refute. As Campbell prepared leaving, Sophie grabbed his arm. Thank you for coming over, for sitting on my floor with me, for understanding that sometimes survival looks like breaking down completely before building yourself back up. That's what partners do. We catch each other when falling. Campbell smiled, and it was first genuine smile Sophie had seen from him. 6 weeks, Sophie. We can survive 6 more weeks, and then we're free. After Campbell left, Sophie went to her studio and threw herself into work. The Marcus Reynolds project was her lifeline. 50,000 total payment, enough surviving for months if careful. She designed like her life depended on it, because it did. That evening, Joe came home late, smelling of perfume and lies. He kissed Sophie's cheek and asked about her day, and Sophie performed interest in his fake presentation so perfectly that even she was impressed by how easily lies came now. But that night, lying beside Joe while he slept, Sophie felt something shift inside. Not breaking, not anymore. Hardening, turning into something stronger and colder and more dangerous than the woman she'd been 3 weeks prior. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was planning, strategizing, preparing for war. Day 21, 42 days remaining, and Sophie Devine was learning that sometimes you have to break completely before becoming unbreakable. Chapter 4. The Suspicion. Joe Clark wasn't stupid, and by week 5 he was starting to ask questions that made Sophie's blood run cold. "Babe, who's Marcus Reynolds?" Sophie looked up from her laptop where she was finalizing designs for the Tech Vista project. It was Wednesday night, and she was supposed to meet Campbell at midnight to share updates, but Joe was home early and showing no signs of going to bed. A client. Why? Because Helena Moretti mentioned at a business lunch today that she'd heard you're working on a major tech company renovation. Said Marcus Reynolds was singing your praises to everyone. I didn't even know you had that project. Joe's voice was casual, but his eyes were sharp. Since when do you take on clients I don't know about? Sophie's heart hammered, but her voice stayed steady. Since I realized I need to build my business independently. You've been so busy lately, I didn't want to bother you with my studio stuff. Marcus found me through a design forum online. It's been great for my portfolio. Interesting, because I called your studio number this afternoon and it went to voicemail. Where were you? This was it. The moment Sophie had been dreading. Joe was suspicious, and if she wasn't careful, he'd figure out everything. Meeting with a potential client at their office. I've been doing that more lately, going to client locations instead of making them come to me. It's better for business. Sophie closed her laptop with deliberate calm. Joe, is everything okay? You seem stressed. The deflection worked. Joe's expression shifted from suspicious to defensive. I'm fine, just noticing you're different lately, distant, like you're always thinking about something else. I'm building my business. That requires focus. I thought you'd be happy I'm taking my work seriously. I am. Joe trailed off, seeming to wrestle with something. Are we okay, Sophie? Is there something going on I should know about? The hypocrisy was so blatant, Sophie almost laughed. Instead, she stood and moved toward him, wrapping her arms around his waist in a performance of affection that made her skin crawl. We're fine, darling. You've been working so hard lately, and I've been focused on my projects. We're just both busy. Maybe we should plan a date night this weekend. Joe relaxed slightly, wrapping his arms around her. Yeah, that sounds good. I'm sorry, babe. I've been paranoid lately. Work stress, I guess. I understand. Let's both try to be more present, okay? Joe kissed her, and Sophie kissed him back, and the entire interaction was such a perfect performance of marital normalcy that Sophie felt sick. But it worked. Joe's suspicion eased, and by the time he went upstairs to shower, Sophie's phone buzzed with a text from Campbell. Can't meet tonight. Katie's home and watching me like a hawk. She asked me yesterday who I've been texting late at night. We need to be more careful. Are you okay? Sophie typed back quickly. Joe's suspicious too. Asked about my new clients. I covered, but this is getting dangerous. Maybe we should pause the weekly meetings for a while. Campbell's response came fast. No. We need those meetings to stay sane. But we need to be smarter. Different locations, different times, better cover stories. I'll figure something out and text you tomorrow. Sophie deleted the message thread and went upstairs where Joe was in the shower. She stood in their bedroom, looking at the life she'd built with this man, and felt nothing but desperate determination to escape it. The next morning, Sophie was in her studio when her phone rang. Unknown number, but local area code. Ms. Devine, this is Jennifer Martinez. I'm calling from Clark and Associates. I'm Joe's business partner, and I wanted to reach out about something delicate. Sophie's stomach dropped. I'm listening. There's been some concern at the office about Joe's behavior lately. Missed meetings, distracted during presentations, spending company money on things that don't quite add up to legitimate business expenses. I wanted to talk to you wife to wife before we have to address this officially. Is everything okay at home? This was dangerous territory. Jennifer was offering Sophie information, but it was also a trap. Anything Sophie said could get back to Joe. Jennifer, I appreciate you calling, but if there are issues with Joe's work performance, those should be addressed with Joe directly. I don't involve myself in his business affairs. Of course. I understand. Jennifer paused. Sophie, off the record. If Joe is having an affair, I think you should know. His assistant mentioned seeing him at hotels during business hours. With a blonde woman. I thought you deserved to hear it from someone who cares about both of you. Sophie made a split-second decision to play ignorant. That's probably his colleague Melissa. They've been working on a project together. Joe mentioned they were having a lot of client dinners. I appreciate your concern, but I'm sure everything is fine. Okay, I just wanted to make sure. But Sophie, if you ever need someone to talk to, or if things aren't fine, please call me. I've known Joe for 5 years, and lately he's not himself. After hanging up, Sophie immediately texted Campbell. Joe's business partner just called me. She knows about the affair or suspects it. Said Joe's been behaving strangely at work. This is escalating faster than we planned. Campbell called instead of texting. We're out of time. We need to move now, not in 3 weeks. If Joe's colleagues are noticing, if people are starting to ask questions, we've already lost the element of surprise. Campbell, I don't have enough money saved. I have maybe 8,000 total with the Marcus project deposit. That's not enough to survive leaving Joe. Then we make the exposure so public, so devastating, that Joe has no choice but to give you a settlement just to make you go away quietly. Sophie, I've been working on something. A way to reveal everything all at once, to everyone who matters, in a way they can't ignore or dismiss. But it's aggressive, it's nuclear, and once we do it, there's no going back. Tell me. We create a presentation, photos, text messages, timeline of the affair, documentation of how you built Joe's career and how I funded Katie's lifestyle. We send it to everyone, their families, their friends, Joe's colleagues, Katie's social circle. We make it impossible for them to spin the narrative or claim we're lying. We destroy their reputation so thoroughly that they'll sign divorce papers just to stop the bleeding. Sophie felt ice and fire mix in her veins. That's not just revenge. That's mutually assured destruction. Exactly. We give them one chance. Sign fair divorce agreements giving us what we need to survive, or we send the presentation to everyone. They'll choose divorce. Neither of them can afford the social consequences of this going public. When? This weekend. I'll put together the presentation. You gather anything you have from your end. We'll meet Friday night, finalize everything, and Saturday morning we give them both the ultimatum. By Saturday afternoon, either we're free or we've gone down in flames, taking them with us. Sophie thought about 5 more weeks of performing, 5 more weeks of slowly dying inside, 5 more weeks of Joe's lies. She thought about Jennifer's phone call and Joe's growing suspicion and the fact that their window was closing fast. Okay, this weekend, we end this. Sophie, are you sure? Once we do this, we can't undo it. I'm sure. I'm done being careful. I'm done being patient. I'm done pretending to be someone who tolerates betrayal. This weekend, Joe and Katie learn what happens when you underestimate the people you've betrayed. They hung up, and Sophie returned to her design work with hands that no longer shook. Fear had transformed into something else, something harder. Something that looked a lot like rage, channeled into cold, calculated strategy. That evening, Joe came home and immediately went to his computer, typing furiously and occasionally glancing at Sophie with an expression she couldn't quite read. Suspicion? Guilt? Both? Everything okay? Sophie asked, keeping her voice light. Yeah, just work stuff. But Joe's hands were shaking slightly, and he closed his laptop when Sophie walked past. He knew something. Maybe not everything, but something, which meant they were out of time. Sophie went upstairs to shower and stood under the hot water thinking about the next 3 days. Friday night she'd meet Campbell for the last time before the explosion. Saturday morning they'd deliver the ultimatum. By Saturday night, she'd either be free or completely destroyed. There was no middle ground anymore, no safety net, no backup plan. Just two people with nothing to lose and everything to fight for. Day 33, 3 days to go. And Sophie Devine was done pretending to be anything except exactly what she'd become. A woman betrayed who'd learned to betray better, a woman underestimated who'd learned to calculate colder, a woman who'd been trapped who was about to show her captors exactly what happens when you corner something with nothing left to lose. 3 days until freedom or destruction. Sophie was ready for either. Chapter 5. The Final Preparation. Friday night arrived like the calm before an earthquake, and Sophie drove to meet Campbell one last time before everything exploded. They'd chosen a parking garage in the business district, empty at midnight on a weekend. Cameras pointed at cars, not people, perfect for a final strategy session before war. Campbell was already there, his rental car parked in the darkest corner, his laptop open on the hood showing the presentation that would destroy 2 lives. "I can't believe we're actually doing this," Sophie said, sliding out of her car and moving to stand beside him. In 3 days they'd become partners in a way that went beyond strategy. 2 people who'd seen each other at their lowest and were still standing. "We don't have a choice anymore. Joe's business partner calling you, Katie's friend asking me if our marriage is okay, both of them getting suspicious. We're on borrowed time." Campbell turned his laptop towards Sophie. "I finished the presentation. Want to see?" Sophie looked at the screen and felt her breath catch. Campbell had created something devastating, a 40-slide presentation titled The Truth About Joe Clark and Katie Kellaway, complete with surveillance photos, text message screenshots, financial documentation, and a timeline showing 8 weeks of systematic betrayal. But the genius was in the details. Campbell hadn't just documented the affair. He documented everything. Photos of Sophie's client list showing how she'd introduced Joe to every major contact. Financial records showing how Joe's income had tripled after marrying Sophie. Text messages where Joe explicitly acknowledged that his success was built on Sophie's connections while calling her boring and cold. For Katie, Campbell had done the same. Financial documentation showing every purchase Katie made on Campbell's credit cards, social media posts of Katie's luxury lifestyle, all funded by Campbell's money. Text messages where Katie called Campbell her bank account and discussed with Joe how long she'd need to stay married to maximize the payout. "This is brutal," Sophie whispered. "This is truth. And Sophie, I added one more thing." Campbell scrolled to the final slide. It was a split screen. On one side, a photo of Sophie in her studio, surrounded by her designs and awards. On the other side, a photo of Campbell at his company, standing in front of the data security software he'd built from nothing. The caption read, "These are the people who built empires." Joe Clark and Katie Kellaway just borrowed the keys and called themselves homeowners. Sophie felt tears prick at her eyes, not from sadness, but from being seen so completely by someone who understood what it felt like to have your work stolen and your worth dismissed. "When do we send it?" "Tomorrow morning at 8. We deliver identical ultimatums to both of them. They have until noon to sign divorce agreements we've pre-written giving us fair settlements. If they refuse, at 12:01 this presentation goes to everyone. Their families, friends, colleagues, social circles, everyone. And if they call our bluff, then we destroy them publicly and deal with the consequences. But Sophie, they won't call our bluff. Joe can't afford to have his colleagues know his entire career is built on your work. Katie can't afford to have her social circle know she married Campbell for money and cheated on him. They'll sign." Sophie pulled out her phone, showing Campbell the divorce agreement she'd drafted with the help of a legal templates website. "I'm asking for the house, $20,000 in immediate cash settlement, and a 50% stake in any business deals that came through my connections for the next 2 years. That's fair compensation for building his career. I'm asking for my company stock returned. Katie gets nothing from the divorce, and she repays $50,000 in credit card charges for non-marital expenses. My lawyers told me that's defensible based on the prenup. Campbell closed his laptop. We're really doing this. Tomorrow morning we blow up both their worlds. Are you scared? Terrified. You? More scared than I've ever been. But Campbell, I'm also more sure. Because staying in this marriage is killing me slower than a public divorce could ever hurt. At least if we do this, we control the narrative. We tell the truth instead of letting them spin lies about us. Campbell reached out and took Sophie's hand, and the gesture was so natural Sophie almost didn't notice how much she'd come to depend on this man's presence over 5 weeks of coordinated survival. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever the consequences, I need you to know something. What? Meeting you was the best thing to come from the worst thing that ever happened to me. Katie's betrayal destroyed me, but it led me to your door. And Sophie, even if tomorrow goes terribly, even if we lose everything, I'll never regret that. You saved me when I was drowning. I hope I did the same for you. Sophie felt something break open in her chest, not breaking apart, but breaking free. You did. You gave me back myself. Joe made me small and scared and financially dependent, and you reminded me that I'm brilliant and capable and strong enough to fight back. That's worth everything to me. They stood in that parking garage in the middle of the night, two people who'd been destroyed by betrayal and had somehow found each other in the wreckage, and Sophie realized something that terrified her more than tomorrow's ultimatum. She'd fallen for Campbell Kellaway. Not because he'd saved her, but because he'd believed she could save herself. Not because he was perfect, but because he was real. Not despite the revenge plot that brought them together, but because he'd seen her at her worst and chosen to stand beside her anyway. Campbell, Sophie started, but he shook his head. Don't, not yet. Let's get through tomorrow first. Let's get free. And then, Sophie, if you want to figure out what this is between us, we'll have all the time in the world. Campbell smiled, and it was sad and hopeful and scared all at once. But I need you to know that when this is over, I'm not walking away from you. That choice will be yours, but I'm staying. However, you'll have me. Sophie kissed him. Not carefully, not strategically, but desperately, pouring 5 weeks of shared trauma and mutual understanding, and the terrifying realization that she'd found something real in the middle of absolute chaos. Campbell kissed her back like she was oxygen, and he'd been drowning, and for a moment in that empty parking garage they weren't two people planning revenge. They were just two people who'd survived hell together and were starting to believe they might survive what came after. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Sophie rested her forehead against his. Tomorrow, we destroy them. And then we figure out how to build something beautiful from the wreckage. Deal? Deal. They separated before anyone could see them together, driving away in opposite directions toward homes where their spouses were sleeping, oblivious to the fact that their lives were about to implode. Sophie drove on autopilot, her mind racing through tomorrow's confrontation, her heart still hammering from Campbell's kiss, her entire being focused on the next 12 hours. She arrived home to find Joe asleep on the couch, his laptop still open beside him. Sophie glanced at the screen, email to Katie discussing their afternoon plans for next week, making arrangements for a future they thought they'd have together. Sophie closed the laptop, covered Joe with a blanket and went upstairs to the guest bedroom where she'd been sleeping for the past 2 weeks, claiming insomnia. She set an alarm for 7, laid out clothes for tomorrow's confrontation, and tried to sleep. She couldn't. Her mind kept replaying Campbell's presentation, kept running through every possible outcome, kept circling back to the kiss in the parking garage and what it meant that she'd fallen for the man who'd appeared at her door offering revenge. At 6, Sophie gave up on sleep and showered, dressing in black jeans and a white blouse, armor that looked casual but felt like war paint. She made coffee, reviewed her divorce agreement one final time, and sent Campbell a text. "Ready?" His response came immediately. "Ready. Let's finish this." At 7:45, Sophie heard Joe stirring downstairs. She took a deep breath, grabbed her laptop where she'd saved Campbell's presentation and her divorce agreement, and prepared to end her marriage. Day 35. 0 days to go. And Sophie Devine was about to show Joe Clark exactly what happened when you underestimated your wife's capacity for strategic destruction. Chapter 6. The Reckoning. Sophie walked downstairs at exactly 8 in the morning, laptop under her arm, coffee in hand, looking like someone who'd made a decision and had no intention of turning back. Joe was in the kitchen making breakfast, still in his pajamas, completely unprepared for what was about to hit him. "Morning, babe. You're up early." "Sit down, Joe. We need to talk." Something in Sophie's voice made Joe's smile falter. "What's wrong?" "Everything." Sophie set her laptop on the kitchen table and opened it, pulling up Campbell's presentation. "I know about Katie. I've known for 5 weeks. I have documentation of every hotel meeting, every text message, every lie you've told me for the past 8 months. And Joe, I'm done pretending I don't know." Joe's face went from confused to pale to panicked in 3 seconds. "Sophie, wait, I can explain." "No, you can't, because there's no explanation that makes this okay." Sophie turned her laptop toward him, showing him the first slide, a photo of him and Katie walking into the Riverside Hotel, date-stamped and undeniable. "Her husband knows too. Campbell Kellaway and I have been working together for 5 weeks, documenting everything, every lie, every betrayal, every moment you thought you were getting away with something." Joe stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing without sound. "You've been working with Campbell? How? Why?" "Because we both deserved better than what you and Katie gave us. Because we were both betrayed by people we trusted. Because we decided that if our spouses could work together to destroy our marriages, we could work together to expose them." Sophie advanced to the next slide. Text messages where Joe called her his meal ticket, where he explicitly acknowledged building his career on her connections while calling her boring. "This presentation goes to everyone at noon. Your colleagues, your clients, your family, everyone, unless you sign this." Sophie pulled out the divorce agreement. "You have until noon to sign papers giving me the house, $20,000 immediate cash settlement, and 50% of future earnings from any business that came through my connections. That's fair compensation for building your entire career, Joe." Joe grabbed the divorce papers, his hands shaking. "Sophie, please, we can work through this. I'll end things with Katie. I'll go to counseling. I'll do whatever you want. Please don't do this." "No." Sophie's voice was ice. "You don't get to keep me as a backup plan while you decide if Katie's worth leaving me for. You don't get to destroy our marriage and then ask me to fix it. You made your choice, Joe. Now you live with the consequences." "And if I refuse to sign?" Sophie pulled out her phone, showing him a contact list of 50 people. "Then at noon, everyone on this list receives the full presentation. Your business partner, Jennifer. Every client I introduced you to. Your parents. My parents. Everyone who needs to know that Joe Clark is nothing without Sophie Devine propping him up." Joe stared at the list, at his entire professional and personal life about to implode, and Sophie watched him break. "You'd really do that? You'd destroy my career, my reputation, everything? You destroyed my marriage, my trust, my ability to feel safe in my own home. What I'm doing is giving you a choice. Sign the papers and end this quietly, or refuse and watch everything burn. Your call." Joe looked at the divorce agreement, at the presentation on Sophie's laptop, at his wife, who'd transformed from compliant to calculating in 5 weeks. "How long have you been planning this?" "Since the night Campbell showed up at our door. Since I realized I was financially trapped and needed time to build my own resources. Since I understood that the only way to survive leaving you was to gather leverage you couldn't fight." Sophie leaned forward. "You want to know what the worst part is, Joe? It wasn't the affair. It was realizing that you've been calling me boring and cold while I spent 8 years building everything you are. That's what I can't forgive." Joe's face crumpled, and he started crying. Real tears, desperate and broken. "I love you, Sophie. I made a terrible mistake. Please, we can fix this. I'll sign a postnup giving you everything. I'll do counseling. I'll never see Katie again. Just please don't leave me. Please." For a moment, one brief, aching moment, Sophie felt sorry for him. This was the man she'd married, the man she'd loved, the man she'd spent 8 years building a life with. Seeing him broken and begging hurt more than she'd expected. But then she remembered the text messages calling her boring. She remembered Patricia's pitying look. She remembered Joe's lies. She remembered 5 weeks of terror and exhaustion and performing love while dying inside. "Sign the papers, Joe. You have until noon." Sophie walked out of the kitchen, leaving Joe with the divorce agreement and the presentation and 4 hours to make a choice. She drove to her studio and called Campbell. "How did it go?" "He's breaking down, crying, begging. I gave him until noon." Sophie's voice shook despite her determination. "How about Katie?" "Same. She's threatening to fight this, threatening lawyers. But she knows I have everything documented. She knows if this goes public, her reputation is done. She'll sign, Sophie. They both will. And if they don't, then at noon we burn everything down and deal with the consequences together. But they will, Sophie. They're cowards. They only feel powerful when they think they're getting away with something. Now that they know we know, now that they understand the stakes, they'll fold." Sophie sat in her studio among her designs and her awards, and the proof that she'd built her career despite Joe's attempts to keep her small, and waited for the phone to ring. It did, at 10:30. Joe, voice hoarse from crying. I'll sign everything. Just please don't send that presentation. Please, Sophie. Bring the signed papers to my studio. I'll have a notary here to witness. And Joe, Katie's husband is divorcing her too. Your affair partner will be single and broke. You got exactly what you wanted, each other with nothing else left." Joe hung up without responding. At 11, he appeared at Sophie's studio with signed divorce papers, his face blotchy and aged 10 years overnight. The notary witnessed the signatures in silence, and by 11:30, Sophie's 8-year marriage was legally over. "What happens now?" Joe asked as the notary left. "Now you transfer the 20,000 settlement by end of business today. Now you move out of the house by end of week. Now you live with what you did and who you became." Sophie stood, walking to her studio door. "Goodbye, Joe. I hope Katie was worth destroying everything for." Joe left without another word, and Sophie collapsed into her chair, shaking with adrenaline and relief and exhaustion. Her phone rang. Campbell. Katie signed. "It's done. We're free, Sophie. We're actually free." Sophie started crying, not sad tears but relief tears, liberation tears, tears that washed away 5 weeks of performing and lying and slowly dying inside. "We did it. We actually did it. We did. And Sophie, can I see you? Not to plan strategy, not to survive anything, just to see you because we're finally free and I need to know this is real. Come to my studio, please." Campbell arrived 20 minutes later, and the moment he walked through the door, Sophie fell into his arms. They held each other in silence, two people who'd survived hell together and had somehow made it out the other side. "We're divorced," Sophie whispered. "Both of us. It's really over. It's over. The nightmare is over. And Sophie?" Campbell pulled back just enough to look at her. "Now we figure out what comes next. Together, if you'll have me." Sophie kissed him, and this kiss tasted like freedom and possibility and the terrifying beauty of starting over. Together. Let's figure out together. Day 35. And Sophie Devine was finally, completely, absolutely free. Chapter 7. The Aftermath. The next 2 weeks were simultaneously the hardest and most liberating of Sophie's life, because freedom turned out to be more complicated than revenge had been. Joe moved out within 3 days, taking his clothes and his lies, and leaving Sophie alone in the house that suddenly felt both too empty and finally peaceful. The 20,000 settlement cleared on schedule, and combined with payments from 3 design projects Campbell had referred, Sophie's bank account showed $32,000, enough to survive for 6 months if she was careful. Campbell's divorce finalized faster. His prenup and Katie's infidelity meant she got nothing but her own clothes and the car she'd bought with his credit card. Katie moved back to her mother's house, her social circle evaporating overnight when word spread about why Campbell had left her. Joe and Katie didn't end up together. According to Jennifer, who'd reached out to Sophie after the divorce went through, Joe had tried dating Katie for approximately 2 weeks before realizing that without money and excitement and the thrill of betrayal, they had absolutely nothing in common. Katie had apparently dumped Joe via text, citing his inadequate financial prospects. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Sophie and Campbell saw each other carefully at first, coffee in public places, dinner at restaurants, trying to figure out if what they'd built during the worst time of their lives could survive in normal circumstances. The answer turned out to be yes, but it took time to trust that it was real. "I keep waiting for you to realize you only needed me for revenge," Sophie admitted one evening over dinner at a quiet Italian restaurant. "That now that we're free, you don't actually want the mess of being with someone who comes with 8 years of marriage baggage." Campbell reached across the table and took her hand. "Sophie, I fell for you when you were sitting on your kitchen floor crying over a broken coffee mug. I fell for you when you showed up at midnight strategy sessions, running on 3 hours of sleep and pure determination. I fell for you when you kissed me in a parking garage and chose to believe we could survive. You're not baggage. You're the person who saved my life by letting me help save yours." They took it slow. Sophie focused on building her design business into something sustainable. The Marcus Reynolds project led to 3 more referrals, and within 6 weeks, Sophie had a client roster that had nothing to do with Joe. Campbell focused on untangling his company from Katie's legal attempts to claim she deserved settlement despite the prenup, and on launching a mentorship program for foster youth interested in tech. They went on actual dates. They talked about things that had nothing to do with surveillance or divorce strategy. They learned each other as people rather than as partners in revenge, and discovered that they liked what they found. 3 months after the divorces finalized, Campbell asked Sophie to move in with him, not because either of them needed the other, but because they wanted to build something together. Sophie said yes, and they chose a new place neither of them had lived before, a house with a studio space for Sophie and a home office for Campbell, and no ghosts of betrayal haunting the halls. They were unpacking boxes on a Saturday afternoon when Sophie found the notebook, Campbell's original surveillance documentation from his desperate early days of tracking Katie. She showed it to him, and they both stared at the cheap spiral notebook that had started everything. "Should we burn it?" Sophie asked, "like a symbolic letting go of the past?" "No, let's keep it. Not to remember the pain, but to remember what we survived, to remember that we were strong enough to fight back when we had nothing but each other and refusal to surrender." Campbell took the notebook and put it on a bookshelf beside Sophie's first design award. "Reminders that we're survivors." Sophie wrapped her arms around him and thought about how impossible this would have seemed 5 months ago, standing in a house they'd chosen together, building a life based on choice rather than necessity, loving someone who'd seen her at her absolute worst and chosen to stay anyway. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "The revenge, the exposure, the way we destroyed them?" Campbell thought about it honestly. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that 2 people we once cared about hurt us so badly that we felt we had no choice but to fight back. But do I regret meeting you? Do I regret surviving it together? Never. You're the best thing that came from the worst thing, Sophie. I'll never regret that." 6 months after the divorces, Sophie ran into Joe at a coffee shop. He looked older, tired, working at a small real estate firm in the suburbs, making a fraction of his former income. He saw her and immediately looked away, but Sophie walked over to his table. "Hello, Joe." He looked up, surprised and wary. "Sophie, how are you?" "Happy, really genuinely happy. You?" Joe's expression crumpled slightly. "I'm surviving, Lost most of my clients after the divorce. Turns out without your connections, I'm pretty mediocre at this job. Jennifer's been kind enough to give me work, but it's not the same. I'm sorry you're struggling, I genuinely am, but Joe, you made choices that led here, you have to own that. I know, and Sophie, I'm sorry. For everything, for cheating, for taking you for granted, for not seeing how extraordinary you were until it was too late. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. Sophie felt something loosen in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but closure. Thank you for saying that. I hope you figure things out, Joe. I hope you learn from this and become better. I heard you're with Campbell now. Are you happy? More than I ever was with you. And that's not meant to hurt you, it's just the truth. Campbell sees me, Joe. All of me. The brilliant parts and the broken parts and the parts that are still healing. You only ever saw what I could do for you. Joe nodded, accepting the truth of it. I'm glad you're happy. You deserve it. Sophie left him there with his coffee and his regrets, and when she got to her car, Campbell was waiting. He'd stayed outside while Sophie talked to Joe, giving her space but staying close in case she needed him. You okay? Campbell asked as Sophie got in the passenger seat. Yeah, I really am, because seeing him didn't hurt anymore. It just reminded me how far I've come, how much stronger I am now than I was then. Sophie took Campbell's hand. Take me home. Always. 1 year after the divorces finalized, Campbell proposed to Sophie on the anniversary of the night he'd first shown up at her door, midnight on her front porch, this time with a ring instead of surveillance photos. A year ago, I stood here desperate and broken and asked you to help me survive. You said yes when you had every reason to say no. Sophie Devine, I'm asking you again, will you build a life with me? Not because we're running from something, but because we're running towards something better. Marry me. Sophie said yes without hesitation, and they married 3 months later in a small ceremony with friends who'd watched them both rise from the ashes of their destroyed marriages into something real and lasting and beautiful. At the reception, Sophie gave a toast that made everyone cry. A year and a half ago, my husband betrayed me, and I thought my life was over. I was wrong, my old life was over, but it made space for something better. Campbell didn't save me, I saved myself. But he stood beside me while I did it, and that made all the difference. To choosing yourself, to fighting back, and to building something beautiful from ruins. They danced under string lights, and Sophie thought about the woman she'd been 18 months ago, scared, trapped, financially dependent, performing love while dying inside. That woman was gone. In her place was someone stronger, harder, more honest about what she deserved and willing to fight for it. 3 years after everything exploded, Sophie saw Katie one final time at a charity event Sophie was attending as the featured interior designer. Katie looked older, working as a pharmaceutical sales rep again, her designer clothes gone, her confidence dimmed. Sophie. Katie approached her hesitantly. You look amazing. I heard you're married now. To Campbell. I am. We're very happy. I'm glad, and I'm sorry. For everything. For the affair, for the pain I caused. You didn't deserve any of it. Katie's voice cracked. I lost everything because I was greedy and selfish and stupid, and you and Campbell ended up with each other. The universe has a sense of humor, I guess. Sophie looked at this woman who'd helped destroy her first marriage and felt nothing but distant pity. I hope you find happiness, Katie. Real happiness, not the kind that comes from someone else's wallet. But it won't be with me or Campbell. We're done with people who take without giving. Katie nodded and walked away, and Sophie returned to the event where Campbell was waiting with champagne and a smile that still made her heart skip after 3 years together. You're too kind to people who don't deserve it, Campbell said, handing her a glass. I'm not kind, I'm just free. She can't hurt me anymore, neither can Joe. They're just people who made terrible choices that led to better things for us. Sophie clinked her glass against his. to terrible choices that led to better lives. To terrible choices, Campbell echoed, and to the best thing that came from the worst thing. They toasted under the lights of the event Sophie had designed, surrounded by clients who respected her work and paid her fairly, building a life that looked nothing like the one she'd escaped and everything like what she'd always deserved. And somewhere in the city, Joe Clark and Katie Mack were living their own lives, carrying their own regrets, learning their own lessons. But they didn't matter to Sophie's story anymore. They'd been the catalysts, the darkness that made the light seem brighter. Sophie Devine Kellaway had spent 8 years building a man who didn't deserve her. She'd spent 5 weeks planning revenge, and she'd spent the 3 years since building a life that proved the best payback wasn't destruction. It was renaissance. Chapter 8. The Choice. 6 months into their marriage, Sophie and Campbell decided to have a baby, and with that decision came the terrifying realization that they needed to finally let go of the past completely. They were sitting in their living room, Sophie curled against Campbell's side, when the conversation happened naturally, not planned, just emerging from the comfortable silence they'd learned to share. "I want a family with you," Sophie said quietly. "A real family. Kids, chaos, the whole thing. But Campbell, I need to know, are we ready? Are we healed enough to bring a child into this?" Campbell was quiet for a long moment. "I think about that a lot. Whether we're building our life on a foundation of revenge or on something real. Whether what brought us together will poison what we're trying to create. And I think we're real. I think we started in darkness, but we've chosen light every day since. I think our daughter, or son, will grow up watching 2 people who refused to stay broken, who fought for better, who turned betrayal into strength." Campbell pulled Sophie closer. "Yes, I think we're ready." They started trying immediately, and 3 months later, Sophie held a positive pregnancy test with shaking hands and tears streaming down her face. Not sad tears, healing tears, hope tears, tears that washed away the last remnants of the woman who'd sat on her kitchen floor 5 years ago crying over a broken coffee mug. Campbell cried too when she told him, holding her like she was something precious and miraculous, and for the first time since everything had exploded, Sophie felt completely at peace with where her life had led. But pregnancy brought unexpected challenges, not physical, but emotional. Sophie found herself thinking about Joe more than she had in years, wondering what kind of father he'd have been, wondering if part of her would always carry the scar of his betrayal, even if the wound had healed. She confided this to Campbell one evening when she was 4 months pregnant and feeling inexplicably emotional. "I don't love him anymore. I don't even miss him. But I'm bringing a baby into the world, and I keep thinking about how Joe wanted kids, and I said we should wait. I wonder if that's part of why he cheated, if I denied him something important and pushed him toward someone else." Campbell took her face in his hands, his expression fierce. "Sophie, listen to me. Joe cheated because he was selfish and entitled and thought he could have everything without consequences. Not because you made one decision about timing. That's him trying to justify his choices by making them your responsibility. Don't let him do that, even in your head. I know you're right, but Campbell, what if I'm a terrible mother? What if I'm too broken from everything that happened? Then we'll figure it out together. We'll be imperfect parents raising a kid in an imperfect world, doing our best and apologizing when we mess up. That's all anyone can do." Campbell placed his hand on Sophie's small bump. "This baby is going to grow up knowing they were wanted, knowing their parents chose each other after experiencing the worst, knowing that love looks like fighting for better rather than accepting less. That's not broken, Sophie. That's strong." Grace Kellaway was born on a Tuesday in spring, 7 pounds of pure perfection and new beginnings. Sophie held her daughter for the first time and felt something shift fundamentally in her understanding of love. This was what it was supposed to feel like. Unconditional, unearned, unshakable. Campbell stood beside her, crying openly, and Sophie realized that this moment, this perfect, overwhelming, terrifying moment, was what she'd been fighting for 5 years ago when she documented evidence and strategized revenge. Not just escape from Joe, but the possibility of this life, this family, this love. They brought Grace home to the house they'd chosen together, and Sophie's mother came to stay for 2 weeks to help. On the third night, when Grace was sleeping and Campbell was grocery shopping and Sophie's mother was napping, Sophie's phone rang. Unknown number, but the area code was local. "Hello? Sophie, it's Joe." Sophie's blood went cold. She hadn't spoken to Joe in 4 years, not since that coffee shop conversation, where he'd admitted he was sorry and she'd wished him well before walking away forever. "How did you get this number?" "Your mother. I ran into her at the store and congratulated her on becoming a grandmother. She mentioned you'd just had a baby." Joe's voice was tentative. "I'm not calling to cause problems. I just wanted to say congratulations. And Sophie? I'm glad you're happy. You deserve it." Sophie looked at Grace sleeping in her bassinet, at this tiny person who represented everything good that had come after everything terrible, and made a decision. "Thank you, Joe. That's kind of you to say. I got married last year to someone I met at work. Her name is Rachel. She's nothing like you, not as brilliant, not as accomplished, but she's kind and patient, and she sees me for who I actually am, the mediocre real estate agent, not the success story I pretended to be when I was with you. I'm glad you found someone, Joe. Genuinely. Are you happy? Really happy, not just saying it to be nice happy?" Sophie thought about Campbell upstairs choosing baby formula, about Grace sleeping peacefully, about the design studio she'd built into a thriving business, about the life she'd created from the ashes of her destroyed marriage. "Yes, I'm really happy. Campbell and I built something real together, something that started in pain but became beautiful. I wouldn't change any of it, Joe, not even the betrayal, because it led me here." Joe was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry. For everything. For wasting 8 years of your life. For cheating. For not seeing how extraordinary you were. I'm sorry, Sophie. I know. And Joe? I forgive you." The words surprised Sophie as much as they probably surprised Joe, because she hadn't planned to say them. But they were true. Not because Joe deserved forgiveness, but because Sophie deserved to stop carrying even the smallest weight of bitterness. "Thank you," Joe said, his voice thick. "I don't deserve that, but thank you. You're right, you don't. But I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for me. Because I don't want my daughter growing up around someone who holds on to anger. I want her to see that you can be hurt and still choose kindness, that you can be betrayed and still choose healing." They hung up a few minutes later, and when Campbell came home with groceries, Sophie told him about the call. He listened without judgment, then asked the question that mattered. "How do you feel?" "Free. Completely. Finally free. Because I realized something. Joe doesn't have any power over me anymore. Not to hurt me, not to make me angry, not even to make me feel complicated emotions. He's just a man I used to know who made terrible choices, and I'm just a woman who survived them and built something better." Campbell pulled her into his arms, careful not to wake Grace sleeping between them. "I love you. Not despite everything that happened, but including it. Every hard moment, every painful choice, every desperate midnight meeting, all of it led us here. And Sophie, I'd do it all again exactly the same way if it meant ending up with you." They stood in their kitchen holding each other while their daughter slept, two people who'd found each other in the darkest circumstances and had somehow built a life full of light. Chapter 9. The Closure. 2 years after Grace was born, Sophie received a phone call that forced her to confront the last piece of her past she'd been avoiding. Katie Kellaway wanted to meet. "I know I have no right to ask," Katie said when Sophie answered the unknown number. "I know I'm probably the last person you ever want to speak to. But Sophie, I'm in therapy now and my therapist suggested I try to make amends to people I've hurt. I'd like to meet you for coffee if you're willing, just to apologize properly, face to face." Sophie's first instinct was to refuse. Katie had helped destroy her first marriage, had mocked her to Joe, had been part of the nightmare that had defined the worst period of Sophie's life. But Sophie also remembered what Campbell had said when she'd forgiven Joe, that sometimes closure wasn't about the other person, it was about releasing yourself from carrying their weight. Okay, one coffee, but Katie, I'm doing this for me, not for you. Understand? They met at a neutral cafe on a Saturday afternoon, Campbell watching Grace at home and waiting for Sophie's text to let him know she was okay. Katie looked different than Sophie remembered, older, tired, wearing clothes from Target instead of designer boutiques, her confidence replaced by something that looked like genuine humility. "Thank you for meeting me," Katie said as they sat down with their coffee. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure I would either. But I'm trying to teach my daughter that holding on to anger hurts you more than it hurts the person you're angry at. So here I am." Katie nodded, tears already forming. "I'm so sorry, Sophie. For the affair, for the cruelty, for participating in destroying your marriage. I was greedy and selfish and I hurt you terribly. There's no excuse for what I did. No, there isn't. But Katie, I need you to understand something. You didn't destroy my marriage. Joe and I destroyed it together over years of not communicating, not addressing problems, not being honest about what we needed. Your affair was the catalyst, but it wasn't the cause. The marriage was already broken. You just exposed it. That's generous, more generous than I deserve. I'm not being generous. I'm being honest. If I'd been happy with Joe, your existence wouldn't have mattered. The fact that he looked outside our marriage for connection means we'd already failed each other." Sophie took a sip of coffee, gathering her thoughts. "But Katie, you still hurt me. You mocked me. You participated in making me feel small and insignificant and boring. That part isn't about Joe. That's about you choosing cruelty." Katie nodded, accepting the truth of it. "You're right, and I'm sorry for that too. I think I tore you down because I was threatened by you. Campbell talked about you sometimes before the affair, mentioned your design work, mentioned how impressive you were, and I felt inferior. So when Joe complained about you, I joined in because it made me feel better about myself. It was weak and wrong." "It was. But Katie, I'm not interested in dwelling on it. I'm interested in understanding why you're here now. What do you actually want from this conversation?" Katie was quiet for a long moment. "I want you to know that I'm different now, that I've spent 3 years in therapy working through why I made such terrible choices, that I've apologized to Campbell too, even though he didn't want to hear it. I want you to know that what I did to you has haunted me, and I'm trying to become someone who wouldn't make those choices again." "Good. That's good, Katie. But I need you to understand that your growth and your healing aren't my responsibility. I'm glad you're working on yourself, but I can't absolve you or tell you that you're forgiven or make you feel better about what you did. That's work you have to do yourself." "I know. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking you to know that I'm sorry, that I see now what I didn't see then, that you were a real person with real feelings who I hurt terribly, that I participated in something cruel and I regret it." Sophie looked at this woman across the table, no longer the confident socialite who'd mocked her to Joe, but a person who'd faced consequences and was trying to learn from them, and felt something she hadn't expected. Compassion. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition that people could grow and change and become better if they were willing to do the hard work. "Okay," Sophie said, "I accept your apology. Not because you've earned my forgiveness, but because accepting it allows me to close this chapter completely. You hurt me, Katie, but you don't have power over my life anymore. I'm happy now in ways I never was with Joe, and that happiness has nothing to do with you or what you did 5 years ago." Katie started crying openly. Thank you for meeting me, for listening, for not telling me to go to hell even though I deserved it." "You're welcome. And Katie, I hope you find happiness too, real happiness, not the kind that comes from someone else's credit card or someone else's validation. But it won't be with me. This is the last time we'll speak. I need you to respect that." Katie nodded. "I understand. And Sophie, Campbell is lucky to have you. Take care of yourself." They parted ways in the parking lot, and Sophie drove home feeling lighter than she had in years. Not because Katie's apology had changed anything, but because Sophie realized she genuinely didn't care about Katie anymore. The woman who'd participated in destroying her first marriage had become nothing more than a stranger who'd once hurt her and was now trying to become better. She arrived home to find Campbell playing with Grace in the living room, their daughter giggling as he made silly faces, and Sophie realized this was what mattered. Not the past, not the people who'd hurt them, not even the revenge that had felt so important 5 years ago. What mattered was this moment, this family, this life they'd built together from the ruins of their destroyed marriages. "How was it?" Campbell asked, looking up as Sophie walked in. "Fine, closure-inducing. Katie apologized, I accepted it, and now I never have to think about her again." Sophie scooped up Grace, breathing in her daughter's baby shampoo scent. "Let's talk about something more important. What should we have for dinner?" And just like that, Katie Kellaway became irrelevant. Not through anger or unforgiveness, but through the simple act of choosing to focus on what mattered rather than what had hurt. That evening, after Grace was in bed, Sophie and Campbell sat on their back porch, watching the stars. It was 5 years to the day since Campbell had first appeared at Sophie's door, offering her partnership in revenge, and they'd both come so far from those desperate, broken people. "Do you think we would have found each other if Joe and Katie hadn't cheated?" Sophie asked. Campbell thought about it. "No, probably not. We moved in completely different circles. I never would have had reason to show up at your door. So in a weird way, we owe them our happiness." "No, we owe ourselves our happiness. They gave us pain and betrayal. We chose to turn that into something better. That's all us, Sophie. They don't get credit for what we built." Sophie leaned against Campbell's shoulder, feeling grateful for this man who'd appeared in her darkest hour and had somehow become her brightest light. 5 years. Can you believe it's been 5 years since the night you showed up with surveillance photos and a desperate plan? "Best terrible decision I ever made. Coming to your house that night changed my entire life. Mine too. I was trapped and terrified and convinced I'd never escape Joe. And then you showed up and gave me hope that maybe fighting back was possible." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd survived hell together and had somehow made it to heaven on the other side. Not perfect heaven. They still had arguments and difficult days and moments when the past crept up unexpectedly. But real heaven, human heaven, the kind built on honesty and choice and mutual respect. "I love you," Sophie said into the quiet evening. "Not because you saved me, but because you stood beside me while I saved myself. That's worth everything. I love you too. And Sophie, thank you for opening the door that night. Thank you for taking a chance on a desperate stranger with a revenge plot. Thank you for building this life with me." Grace cried from inside the house, breaking the moment, and they both laughed as they got up to tend to their daughter. Real life. Beautiful and messy and imperfect, and exactly what they'd been fighting for all along. Chapter 10. The Beginning. 10 years after the night Campbell appeared at Sophie's door, they renewed their wedding vows in the backyard of the house they'd built together. Not the one they'd chosen when escaping their marriages, but a new home they'd designed from scratch with Sophie's vision and Campbell's resources, creating something neither had imagined possible a decade earlier. Grace was 9 years old now, confident and brilliant and showing early signs of inheriting her mother's design talent combined with her father's analytical precision. Her younger brother Jackson was 6, already displaying the tech genius qualities that suggested Campbell's mind had found a worthy successor. Both children knew the story of how their parents met, the age-appropriate version about two people who'd been married to the wrong people and had found each other while surviving difficult times that made them stronger. The vow renewal wasn't about recommitting to marriage. 10 years of partnership had already proven beyond doubt that what they'd built was lasting and real. It was about celebrating how far they'd both traveled from those desperate, broken people they'd been a decade ago, when survival seemed impossible and freedom felt like a fantasy. Sophie stood in a white dress she'd designed herself, surrounded by friends who'd watched her complete transformation from scared and financially trapped to powerful and genuinely free, and thought about the improbable journey that had led to this moment. 10 years. A lifetime compressed into a decade of rebuilding herself from ruins Joe had created. Joe Clark lived somewhere in the distant suburbs with his second wife, Rachel, and their 2 children, working steadily, if not spectacularly, at a mid-sized real estate firm where nobody knew he'd once been someone people considered successful. Sophie saw him occasionally at industry conferences. They'd exchange polite nods and move on immediately. 2 people who'd once shared a life, but now shared nothing except distant history, neither wanted to revisit. Joe looked older every time she saw him, grayer and more tired, like someone who'd made choices he couldn't undo and was slowly accepting the consequences. Katie Mack had remarried too, a kind accountant named David who loved her despite her past mistakes, who didn't have millions but treated her with genuine respect and partnership she'd never valued when she had it with Campbell. She'd sent a brief congratulatory note when Sophie's gallery had been featured in a prestigious national design magazine, acknowledging Sophie's success without expecting response. Sophie had appreciated the gesture but hadn't replied. Some distances were better maintained permanently. As Sophie walked toward Campbell under an arch of flowers their daughter had helped design with remarkable sophistication for a 9-year-old, she thought about revenge and justice and the fundamental difference between destroying someone and reclaiming yourself. They'd planned revenge 10 years ago, systematic destruction of 2 people who'd betrayed them with cruelty and calculation. What they'd actually achieved was justice, taking back what had been stolen, reclaiming their narratives from people who'd tried rewriting them, walking away with dignity intact and heads held high. But the real victory hadn't been destroying Joe and Katie, or exposing their affair, or even winning the divorces. The real victory was this moment, this life, this family they'd built from ashes and desperation. Campbell's vows made everyone present cry, even the men who'd sworn they wouldn't. 10 years ago I knocked on your door in the middle of the night with a desperate plan and probably looked like I'd lost my mind. You could have called the police. You could have slammed the door in my face. Instead, you let me in, and that decision changed everything. You changed everything, Sophie. You taught me that survival requires courage, even when you're terrified, that healing requires brutal honesty, even when lies feel safer, and that love requires choosing each other actively every single day, even when it's hard and complicated and messy. I vow to keep choosing you, in the easy moments and the difficult ones, in celebration and in struggle, in triumph and in failure. Every day for the rest of our lives, I choose you. Sophie's vows were equally powerful, delivered with the confidence of a woman who'd survived hell and emerged unbreakable. 10 years ago, I opened my door to a stranger offering me partnership in revenge. I thought that's what I needed. Revenge, destruction, payback for betrayal that had shattered my world. What I actually needed was hope, wrapped in honesty. You gave me that, Campbell. Not by solving my problems or rescuing me from Joe's betrayal, but by standing beside me while I solved them myself. You gave me space to be broken without judgment, time to heal without pressure, and partnership when I was finally ready to fight back. I vow to give you the same, space and time and partnership and the certainty that you'll never face anything alone as long as I'm breathing. Forever means something when you've survived the worst together and built the best from its ruins. They kissed under the flower arch, while their children cheered and their friends applauded, and Sophie felt complete peace with how her life had unfolded. Not because everything had been easy or perfect or without devastating pain, but because the hard parts had led somewhere beautiful beyond anything she'd imagined, in those dark days of performing love for a man who'd never deserved it. At the reception, Sophie's mother pulled her aside with tears in her eyes. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart, for surviving what Joe did to you, for building this extraordinary life from nothing, for becoming someone so much stronger than your pain could have made you. Thanks, Mom. But I didn't do it alone. Campbell helped me survive." "No, honey." Her mother's voice was firm, carrying the wisdom of someone who'd watched her daughter almost break and then rebuild herself stronger. Campbell stood beside you and gave you tools and partnership, but you did the actual surviving yourself. Don't ever forget that the strength was yours all along. He just helped you remember you had it. Sophie watched Campbell dance with Grace while Jackson ran around with cousins and understood exactly what her mother meant. She'd survived Joe's betrayal not because Campbell had rescued her from it, but because she'd refused to stay broken under its weight. Campbell had been her partner in that survival, her ally in the fight, her comfort in the darkness, but the fundamental strength, the core determination, the refusal to be destroyed had been Sophie's all along. Later that evening, after guests had departed and children were tucked into bed, and Sophie and Campbell sat together on their back porch under stars that seemed brighter than usual, they reflected honestly on the decade behind them. "Do you ever think about them?" Sophie asked quietly. "Joe and Katie, I mean. Wonder what their lives look like now?" "Sometimes. Not often anymore. Mostly I think about how grateful I am that they betrayed us, because their worst actions led me directly to you." Is that terrible to say out loud? No. It's honest, and honesty is what we've built this on. I feel the same way, Campbell. If Joe had been faithful, if he'd been the partner I thought I'd married, I'd still be in that hollow marriage, wondering if something better existed somewhere out there. His betrayal freed me to discover it did. So yeah, I'm grateful. Not for the pain itself, but for where the pain led me. To you. To this. To us. Campbell pulled Sophie closer against his side. "We should probably feel guilty for being glad they hurt us so badly, but I can't manage it. Because these past 10 years with you have been the absolute best of my entire life. Grace and Jackson, this house, the businesses we've built, the life we've created together, none of it happens if Katie doesn't cheat. None of it exists if we don't meet in desperation and survive together. So yes, I'm grateful. Not for what they did, but for what we built from its ruins." Sophie thought about the woman she'd been 10 years ago, scared, financially dependent, performing love while dying inside, trapped in a marriage that was killing her slowly. That woman was gone completely now, replaced by someone who knew her worth absolutely and wouldn't accept anything less than she deserved from anyone. "I saw Joe at a conference last month," Sophie said quietly. "He looked so much older, tired in a way that goes deeper than physical exhaustion. Still working in real estate, but clearly not particularly successful. He saw me across the room and looked away immediately, like he couldn't bear acknowledging me." Does seeing him like that give you satisfaction? Does it feel like justice? No. Honestly, it just makes me sad. Not for him specifically, but for who we both were when we were married. We made each other smaller, Campbell. We brought out each other's worst qualities and convinced ourselves that's what love looked like. I'm glad we both eventually got to find real partnerships instead of that hollow performance. They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd survived the absolute worst life could throw at them and built the absolute best from its wreckage, watching stars appear in the darkening sky above their carefully chosen home. "Thank you," Campbell finally said, his voice carrying genuine emotion. "For opening the door 10 years ago when you had every reason not to. For trusting me when trust seemed impossible. For choosing to fight instead of surrender when surrender would have been so much easier. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for showing up that night. For seeing me when Joe couldn't or wouldn't. For being the partner I didn't even know I desperately needed." Sophie took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of a decade's practice. "To 10 more years? To 10 more years. And then 10 after that. And then forever, however long forever turns out to be." They kissed under the stars, and Sophie thought about revenge and justice and love and how sometimes the absolute worst thing that happens to you opens the door wide for the best thing to walk straight through. Joe Clark and Katie Mack had betrayed them with cruelty and calculation. That was true and unchangeable, and would always be part of their histories. But Sophie Devine Kellaway and Campbell Kellaway had survived their betrayals, had thrived despite them, had built lives so beautiful and meaningful that the betrayal became nothing more than the darkness that made their light shine impossibly brighter by contrast. The revenge had been swift and satisfying in its execution, but the life they'd built in its aftermath, That was eternal, expanding, growing richer with each passing year. And as Sophie and Campbell walked inside hand in hand toward the life they'd built brick by brick and the children they'd made together and the future they'd chosen deliberately, Sophie understood the truth that had taken 10 full years to crystallize completely. The best revenge wasn't destroying the people who'd hurt you or even exposing their cruelty to the world. It was becoming so completely, genuinely, joyfully happy that their entire existence became utterly irrelevant to your story. The end.